Hi, and welcome to the video on quiz corrections. As you may already know, quiz corrections are one of the things you need to do, one of the two things you need to do in order to be eligible to revise your Unit 4 quiz. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the quiz correction form. You can either pick up a form from me or you can create your own, and essentially what the quiz correction form has at the top here, I need the unit number and the quiz number, so this will be Unit 4, Quiz 1. You also need to, for each question that you answered incorrectly, you need to write down the question number, explain your mistake, and then show correct work as necessary. So to help you out with that, here are the correct answers for the multiple choice response. If you need to, you can pause the video and check over your answers. I do want to point out before you pause the video, for question 16, you can receive partial credit because that was a select all that apply. The two correct answers are answers B and D. So if you selected both of those, you get the full point. If you select only one of those, you get a half a point. And if you select both of those, but one of the answer choices is incorrect, for example, if you chose A in addition to B and D, you lose a half a point for A, and so you still only get a half a point overall. And the same thing if you select a choice C, which is incorrect, you would get a half a point overall because you lose a half for selecting C. So take a moment and pause the video to go over the multiple choice answers. All right, now that you've had a chance to check your multiple choice answers, you can utilize that to help you with your quiz correction forms. You need to again explain your mistake and show the correct work. That means that you can't just write down B as the correct answer or A as the correct answer. You have to show the work that is necessary to get you to the correct answer. For example, you may need to draw out Lewis dot structures. You may need to, if you're doing via CPR, I would expect to see the number of electron domains and lone pairs that will help you make your answer choice in addition to the Lewis dot structure. If it's something like polar versus nonpolar, you should explain why the molecule is polar or nonpolar. And if it's likes dissolves like, for the correct work here, you can explain why you believe one molecule dissolves in another. So you could say something like both molecules are polar. If you have any questions on how to explain your mistake or correct work, you should come and see me after school or during lunch. Let's move on now to the free response. So first thing I want to talk about for the free response, that each free response is worth 1 point, and you can receive partial credit on these. So in order to know how many points you did receive on the free response, you are going to need your bubble sheet. I did mark down for some how many points I took off or how many points that I gave you for free response, but not for all. I just used the bubble sheet in all cases. So let's talk about the partial credit. For 17, 18, and 19, if I bubbled in choice A, that means you receive half of that 1 point, and if I bubbled in choice B, you receive the full point. So if you have an A for 17, 18, and 19, you should know that you lost points somewhere. So your answer was not fully correct, and you would need to correct that. But if you received a B, then you know that it's fully correct, so you do not need to correct that. For question 20, each bubble is goes up by increments of 1/4 or 0.25. So if you circled A, you only have 0.25 points, so that's 1/4. B, you get half. C, you get 3/4 or 0.75 points, and then D, you get 1. So again, unless I circle D for question 20, it is not fully correct. You need to correct it. Okay, so let's look at an example here. Let's say, for example, this is what your answer key looked like for questions 17, 18, 19, and 20. You would know that for 17 you got half a point. For 18 you got the full credit, so you don't need to correct that, but you will correct 17. For 19, again, you did not get the full credit because you only got A, so you need to correct that one. You got that half a point. And for 20, you only got C, which again is not full credit, so you need to correct that. So if this is what yours look like, you would need to correct 17, 19, and 20 because you did not receive full points, and you do not have to correct 18 because you received full points. I want to go over some exemplars. This is sort of modified from what students have written as exemplar. So, and I'll explain to you how the points would be divvied up. In question 17, it's explain your answer for question 16 above. And in question 16 above, it was asking you to select which molecule would naphthalene dissolve in. And it says here clearly, be sure to refer to the likes dissolves likes rule. So the way that the points are broken up here is you would get a half a point for saying that naphthalene and then the other substances are nonpolar, okay? And saying that naphthalene will dissolve in those substances because they're nonpolar. So this first sentence, something along this lines, referring to the polarity of naphthalene in the two substances, will give you a half a point. The other half a point comes from referring to the likes dissolves likes rule. So saying something like, according to the likes dissolves likes rule, nonpolar molecules will dissolve nonpolar molecules, okay? So that's how you get your full credit here. First referring to the polarity of naphthalene and then the other substances you selected. And then the second half point comes from referring to the likes dissolve likes rule. So a student wrote something very similar to this. I just sort of paraphrased it in a different way. For question 18, you're asked to examine the Lewis dot structure for C2H2 and which of the following Lewis dot structure is incorrect. Explain why it's incorrect using the octet rule. So here you would receive a half point for describing which of the following Lewis dot structures is incorrect. If you selected the correct one, if you said, oh, Lewis dot structure A is correct, you didn't get half points. You left a half point for that because you didn't read the question correctly. So an exemplar response would be Lewis dot structure B is incorrect because, okay, so now you've identified Lewis dot structure B is incorrect, so that's your first half point. And then the explanation, you get another half point because the first carbon atom has 6 electrons, but it should have 8 according to the octet rule. Notice here for the explanation, I refer to the octet rule, and I specifically say why it doesn't follow the octet rule. So this carbon has 6 electrons. You can count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's touching this carbon here, and it should have 8. So I should see 6 and 8 electrons. That would be my clue that you explained it correctly. If you don't have that explanation correct, you would lose a half point. Next question, question 19. The central atom in a molecule has 3 electron domains and 1 lone pair, and it's asking you to sketch an actual molecular model and then predict the molecular geometry or shape. All right, so you get a half point for your sketch and a half point for the molecular geometry. The sketch can be an actual molecule. I recommended that students take this molecule from the VSEPR chart, but if you did not, some students made up their own. You would get full credit as long as your molecule did not violate the octet rule. If it violated the octet rule, you would lose a half a point. The other thing you could have done was draw a model, which is using just the balls for atoms and like lines for bonds, and then throwing in those lone pairs there. Again, this was something that was seen in the VSEPR chart. So a half point for a correct sketch. For the molecular geometry, since it's 3 electron domains and 1 lone pair, you need to write something like angular or bent. I just want to quickly note that the lone pair is included in the electron domains. So if you didn't consider that part of your 3 electron domains is one of them is a lone pair, then you would have lost a half point for that. All right, last one, question 20, is examine the molecules above, which molecule is polar and which one is nonpolar, and explain how do you know. So for this, you needed to explain both because it's actually which one is polar, which one is nonpolar, and explain how you know for each of them. So the way the points are broken up here is if starting with molecule A, you know that it's polar, so molecule A is polar, that's a quarter of a point, so 0.25 or 1/4. for saying that molecule A is polar, and then the explanation for that would be another quarter. So because the central atom has lone pairs, something like that will give you a half just for explaining that one. And then you get the next half for identifying this as polar or nonpolar molecule B and explaining it. So you can say I know molecule B is nonpolar because there are no lone pairs in central atoms and all terminal atoms are the same, and then you would get the full credit for that. So that's how the points are divided. If you have any further questions about the free response or multiple choice, then you can come check in with me. Remember, these quiz corrections are due before you actually take your revision, and revisions will open up next week, and they'll be open up for 2 weeks only. So once that 2 weeks mark is over, I'm going to close up the revisions for this unit. Hope you found this video helpful. Have a quality day.